Welcome to part two of our journey to close, what to expect when purchasing a property in Florida. And in this video, what we want to talk about is the actual process of closing. What can you expect throughout the term of the contract from the time you sign the contract until the time that we do the closing? We're going to go through each stage of the process and talk about some of the major milestones in each one of those stages. So let's get started. So the first part of the closing process is the period of the contract called the inspection period. This is the period when the buyer is going to be doing physical due diligence on the property, and when the buyer is going to start applying for a loan if it applies, as well as applying for a condominium association if there is one. And where the title company, that's us, that is where we will begin to gather the necessary data to process the file. This data is very, very important because in the beginning, we are trying to get information from the buyer, the seller, the real estate agents, the lender that are absolutely necessary to ensure that there is no delay in closing. So you will get a welcome email, walking you through the process, giving you some of the key dates in the transaction, and asking you for key information. The second part of the second part of the process is the due diligence and financing. So after the inspection period ends, and by the way, in the inspection period, which is when you do the physical due diligence, is when you have the opportunity usually to cancel the contract for any reason. So it's very important that you read the contract, you understand it, and if you don't understand those terms, that you talk to your real estate agent, or we have a phone call so that we can walk you through that. And once you pass that inspection period, now they say the deposit is hard. What does that mean? Now you are into the transaction, and now the contingencies that you have remaining are no longer for anything physical in the property, but now you go into the due diligence and financing period, where what we're trying to do simultaneously between the title company and the lender is trying to approve your loan. So this is the financing period where the buyer is trying to obtain financing, the lender is asking for requirements, and you're going through the loan approval process. And in parallel, what the title company is doing is we're doing the legal review of the history of title, where we're trying to clear the title conditions that the title insurance underwriter has provided so that we can provide the owner and the lender a title insurance policy that would allow us to close the transaction. The third stage is the pre-closing process, right? This is about 3 days to 7 days before the transaction is closing. By this time, we're hoping and expecting that the title conditions are clear. That is not always in the control of the buyer or the title company. Many times there are title conditions that the seller has to take care of that may not be ready by closing. Those are specific circumstances that we will walk through with each individual transaction. It's basically transaction by transaction dependent. In this pre-closing process, as you're getting ready to close, you also want to ensure that you have the condo approval. And if you're getting a mortgage loan, we need what is called a clear to close from the lender. This is the period when all the underwriting conditions from the lender side have been approved. Now, the lender's process and the title and closing process are running in parallel. So sometimes the lender may be ready before the title company, sometimes the title company may be ready before the lender, but essentially the lender and the title company have been coordinating ever since the inspection period to try and get to the closing around the same time. Sometimes it's not possible, and so it's very, very important that buyers know that the the people who will actually confirm the closing is not the lender. The ones who will confirm the closing is the title company. And the reason for this is that the lender's conditions in underwriting require that all the title conditions be clear. And if the seller has not been able to clear all the title conditions, the file cannot move to closing even if the lender is ready. This is why it's so important to have a good communication between the buyer, the lender, and the title company. We as a title company really encourage a lot of coordination calls at the beginning between the buyer, the title company, the buyer's agent, and the lender, so that we can talk about things, understand the each other's requirements, and work together as a team to get you to closing as smoothly as possible. Now, after that clear to close, there is this process called balancing, where the lender will have provided certain disclosures that are required by law, and the title company has to match the lender's figures with the figures that have been accumulating throughout the transaction as we discover things from the history of title, the condominium, etc. And so that the buyer can have a final picture of the amount of money that will be required to close a transaction and all the final closing costs. So sometimes, the buyers want to know their final figures, they want to transfer, and sometimes it's not always possible to know until you finish balancing, which usually ends up happening about, 24 to 48 hours before the transaction closes. So up to that point, you have estimates and you can get pretty close as to what is going to happen, but until we don't have a clear to close and a final balancing, we won't know the final amount. Now, the last stage is the closing stage, where the buyer and the buyer's real estate agent will do a walkthrough of the property, and where if there is a loan involved, the loan package will be sent from the bank to the title company to coordinate the signing of the documents. Right. Once the loan package is in the hands of the title company, it is then that the title company will call for closing. This is the moment where the title company says, we are ready to close. Now we can schedule a time, date, place, and the final amount that you will need based on the balanced figures from the bank and the title company is X. That is what is called the cash to close. It is the final amount of money that the borrower, the buyer will need to send to the title company to finish closing the transaction. And this cash to close takes into consideration the original deposits made, any credits that were received by the buyer in the process, the loan amount, and the closing costs. So the cash to close will be that final amount that takes all those factors into consideration. Now, let's walk real quick through what you can expect in each one of these stages. So, in the first inspection period stage, there are some very key dates you need to be aware of. First, you have the effective date, which is the date when all the parties sign the contract and the timer begins. The effective date is day zero. Everything usually is counted starting on the effective date. Then you have the first deposit date. You have a condo application date if you're applying to an association. There is a loan application date, which is the number of days that the borrower will have to apply to the loan. You have an inspection period deadline, which is a maximum number of days to finish your physical inspections. If you want to go to the city to get the original blueprints of the house, this is the time to do it. And sometimes there is a second deposit. Now, the title company, what we're doing during this inspection period, in addition to gathering the right information, is we're ordering the title search, we're ordering the lien search. This allows us to start getting the history of title together. These documents take usually about 5 to 10 business days, so we want to order them as early as possible. And if for some reason the transaction gets canceled, don't worry, because these documents will not be charged to the buyer. We also try to coordinate with the seller to order payoffs. The payoffs is any mortgages, any liens that may be due from the seller that have to be paid at closing. This takes some time. It takes some coordination. So we try and order these payoffs as early as possible in the process. Now, during this period, the lender is going to ask the borrower to submit their loan application and to sign the disclosures. This is where the borrower and the bank need to order the appraisal. The appraisal will be ordered by the bank directly once the borrower signs the disclosures and pays for the appraisal. We highly recommend that during the inspection period, you start getting home insurance quotes. The home insurance market over the last couple of years has been very volatile, and many times there are surprises in the cost of homeowners insurance, and it sometimes turns out to be more than the original estimates provided by the lender. So we encourage you to start doing your homework on insurance during the inspection period and don't leave it till the end. This is also the period where the lender will provide the borrower the loan estimate. The loan estimate takes into account all of the lender's fees. It also takes into account all of the lender's prepayment and escrow requirements, and is where they incorporate the estimated expenses from the title company side. So we provide an estimate to the bank called a pre-CD that the bank will incorporate into your loan estimate, and that way the borrower will have a full picture of what they can expect to pay at closing. Now, during the due diligence period, there's a couple of other very key deadlines, including the loan approval deadline. This is the amount of time you have to get the loan approved from the effective date. Sometimes it's 20, 25, 30 days. The appraisal deadline, which in the as is Florida contract is the same as the loan approval deadline usually. The title evidence deadline, this is how long we have to reveal to the seller the results of our investigation into the legal history of the property. And we have some other key activities that we are engaging in. For example, we order the survey in coordination with the agent. So a survey is a study of the perimeter of the property to ensure that we can identify any easements and things of that nature. Surveys are required on all loan transactions in single family homes and townhomes. If you are applying to a property with an association, we need to order a document called the estoppel. And actually, the estoppel is a document that is a seller's responsibility. So if the seller has an attorney, usually it will be the seller's attorney who orders it. Otherwise, we will go ahead and order it. During the due diligence and financing period, we expect to receive the title and lien search. So we ordered the title and lien search during the inspection period, and now we're hoping to get it back early in the due diligence and financing period so that we can find any potential defects in the property as soon as possible. And this is where we begin to coordinate any seller document preparation, right? The seller has to provide what's called conveyance documents to transfer the property at closing. And those conveyance documents have several requirements by state law and by contract. And so this is where we begin to coordinate either with the seller directly or with the seller's attorney, the preparation of those documents. In the pre-closing stage, we have the condo approval deadline. This is an important deadline for anything in a condo. And in terms of activities, it's where we're expecting to receive the survey, the estoppel, and the payoffs back from the orders that we did during the due diligence period. Here's where we go through a final document review of the sellers. They have to execute the documents, and those executed documents stay in escrow until the closing. If you're getting a loan, this is where the buyer will expect a pre-CD, where usually there is a 3-day TRID rule where you cannot close a transaction until at least 3 days after this pre-CD is provided by the lender and signed by the buyer. So this is obviously important because this could delay the transaction. And finally, we spoke about the clear to close in the previous slide. This is when the lender has fulfilled all their underwriting requirements. Lastly, we have the closing. This is when the contract closing date is due, and so we need to close on or before the closing date. And here is where we're balancing with the bank as a title company to get the final numbers, to provide the cash to close to the buyer, and where the loan package will be provided for signing. So these are the main stages of the process. It's what you should expect in terms of key dates, key deadlines, and the key activities that the buyer, the seller, the title company, and the lender are doing to try and get you to close on time and stress free. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you.